Welcome back to our author spotlight series for the new book, Messages from Beyond the Sun. I am your host, Dr. Robyn McKay. I have with me Dr. Alaina Puff. And in this interview, we are turning the tables, and Alaina is going to interview me.
Yes, I have the power. I'm so excited to chat more with you about your inspiration for this project, talking more about the launch of this amazing book. And today is launch day in our part of the
I know. Holy smokes. It's been a long time coming. It feels like I started this process on January 1st of this year.
Wow.
And right around this time last year, I said to my husband that I have a strange and highly unusual request for my birthday because my birthday's on January 2nd. I said, I need to check myself into a hotel and start the book. And I need to do it on January 1st, January 2nd, and January 3rd. It was imperative. And bless him, we were at dinner that night, and he literally whipped out his phone and booked the hotel up the road from our house and sent me off and took care of Cooper for a few days when I started the process. Little did I know that initiation of this book would balloon into this beautiful anthology with me and you five contributing authors. It just has been miraculous in how it's unfolded, and a mystery as well. It didn't unfold the way I expected it.
I'm so excited to get into the twists and turns that we went on together to get to this moment and this very day of launch day. So for context, let's back it up a second. Tell us a little bit about you and your background so we can understand how we got to this moment in time.
When I was 5, I decided I was going to be a writer. My favorite TV show at the time was The Waltons, and which you will not know because you are a millennial, but that's okay. You can Google it. John Boy was my favorite character, and John Boy was the oldest boy of the family, and he would sit up in his room at his little desk with his big chief notebook and his pen and write and write. And I thought, after watching him do that, I thought, well, I want to be a writer. So I took out my own big chief notebook when I was 5 years old and laid on the floor in my bedroom with my pencil and set about to write. And I was really disappointed and a little bit concerned. I really think it was my first existential crisis because as I set about to write, I realized two things. One, I couldn't write very well because I was 5 and I was still just learning my letters. And two, probably even more troubling, was I didn't have anything to say. Like, what's supposed to be saying here? So when I look back at my trajectory as a writer, really did start around that time. I won an Arbor Day essay contest in the state of South Dakota when I was in 6th grade. That was the first time I'd really been recognized for my writing. And then in high school, won a $500 scholarship for writing an essay that basically downloaded into my brain on the way to the principal's office to write the darn essay. So that has always been in my field. But along with that, my family history is around writing and publishing as well. I have a great grandfather on my dad's side who wrote his memoir called The Fighting Parson. He was a preacher in Indian territory, and I think I'm pretty sure he was actually Native as well. So I think his mother was First Nations Cree, if I recall correctly. So that was in my history. My aunt, my mom, my dad's sister wrote a book in the 80s called Management Strategies for Women, or Now That I'm a Boss, How Do I Run this place? And so then my dad published a coffee table book when I was like 8 or 9. I was walking around the table, like literally putting the book together page by page with my dad and getting everything ready for binding. And then in high school, my senior year, we actually wrote an anthology in my advanced creative writing class. And I did the same thing. We wrote the book, we edited it, and then we self-published the book. And that would have been in the late 80s. So that writing publishing thing for me has always been just a piece of my life and my history, sort of foundational, but never something that I really focused on until after undergrad when I got my first job in biotech, and I really started working as a technical writer, a medical writer in the pharmaceutical industry, where we were writing and publishing clinical study reports, NDAs, INDs, all of those kinds of materials for getting our drugs approved with the FDA. So like you mentioned in your interview how very few people would read your papers or your dissertation or whatever. I had the same experience as a young writer in the pharmaceutical industry, knowing that there would be, of course, few but important people reading what I was writing, but it was never meant for the masses, except, of course, the package inserts, which nobody can read anyway because the font is so small. And then flash forward to grad school, of course, I had the experience of making the transition from writing technical / pharmaceutical focused writing into social sciences, and was recognized by some of my professors, as one of my professors said that I was the only scientist in the mix in this cohort that I was in. Well, of course, I had been in the pharmaceutical industry for, at that time, probably close to 10 years, and really came to writing from a science perspective, all of my research papers and so on for psychology. So I do have this long history of producing a lot of papers, a lot of not necessarily articles for mass consumption, but definitely have this history. So I want to just flash forward because I want to get to the point here, which is that earlier this year, I had been teaching a course, like a little incubator, on how to write and channel your own text. Because in the meantime, as I've gone through my own spiritual growth and development and understanding spiritual intelligence, understanding who I am as a spiritually intelligent leader, and understanding that channeling or flow-based writing, I'll say, is simply a part of how I live my life. And one of the major milestones as I recognized this was I actually had to retrain myself on how to write for actual humans rather than for like the FDA or for my professors, because that's a very different language. So learning how to write human to human or person to person was something that didn't come easily for me. And that started about 10 years or so ago when I started my business. So this spring, when I was teaching the how to write and channel your own book, really came out of this ask, because I was telling this story to some of my clients and students about how when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I had all of these PhD level scientists working for me who had these big projects, these big writing projects, and I would coach them through it. And I would say, listen, someday in the future, this project is complete. And all you have to do is write to the completion. And you could like visibly see them relax when they realize that, oh, she's right. This is going to be done at some point. And one of my students raised her hand and she said, can you teach us how to do that? And that's really when the whole notion of this anthology, of bringing a collective group of people together to work on this project, came into being. Simultaneously with this, I don't know if simultaneously is the best word, I'll just say another golden thread throughout this is when I was in grad school and I was living with Barb on the farm in Kansas. We were working on Smart Girls, our book that was published 10 years ago. We were talking about my own life, and we always do a lot of future visioning. We always say things like, what does my future home look like? What does my future perfect day look like? And one of the things that I love about Barb is she always names her properties. So she lives on Captain's Creek now. When she lived in Arizona, she lived on Cascabel. And I thought, well, I want a name for my place. And the name Engelheim came through. Engelheim in Icelandic means the angel's world. And then in Norwegian and German, Engelheim means the home of the angels. And I loved that because of my love of angels, of course. And then when it came down to making a decision to publish this book, it's one thing to write, it's another thing to publish it. It just made sense that the publishing division of my company, Sheology by Dr. Robyn McKay, would be named Engelheim, the home of the angels. And that's who I brought into this project, is all of you angels who have messages. And I wanted to create a safe and secure place for you to develop your voices and to master your craft and ultimately to publish really crystal clear books that no one's ever thought of before, ideas that no one else can convey except you guys. So I'll stop there. I know that was a really long story.
No, it's so beautiful to hear even the lineage that came before you, all the way to now, of how writing has been this cornerstone of your identity and your mission of how you communicate with people in the world. And so, and then to culminate that at the development of Engelheim Press, like I think that's just so powerful to hear about how you've transcended through this journey and you're bringing people along the way with you. My next question is, how did you choose to welcome in this first group of authors into the author development program? What was that process like for you as someone who was really overseeing and coaching folks through that process?
Well, one thing is that you've heard me say this before, the best-selling books are a dime a dozen at this point. There's a formula to it. And so that was always a given for me. I've been on those projects where you basically raise your hand, you pay an administration fee, you write your chapter, you turn it in, it gets edited, it gets published, and Bob's your uncle. And you get to add best-selling author to your credentials. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, that was a way bigger deal than it is now. And it's not that it's not a big deal. I think it is important. But beyond that, what I began to recognize, particularly in the spiritual entrepreneur transformational development space, is that there are a lot of people who have really good ideas, who are doing really good work in the world, but they don't consider themselves writers necessarily, like you, even though you taught middle school English and have written a dissertation. There was a question mark about, can I even do this? And I've always been of the belief that I don't want to be a step ahead of my students. I think that my students and my clients want to work with somebody who's an expert. Well, I've been a writer my whole life. And I didn't even mention the first book that I actually published was in 5th grade. It was an ABC book complete with drawings, illustrations that I gave to my English teacher. And my mom was like, well, only one child is going to be able to read it. Why don't you donate it to the library so that many children can read it? So that has always been, that just is, it's in my bones to be a writer. It's in my bones as an author. And so when it came time to look at how do I want Engelheim to be different, how do I want this book project to be different, I wanted to call for the people who are highly credentialed. So everybody on the book are experts in their field. We have a PhD, we have a longtime business leader and a leader in agriculture, Judy. We have a fine artist, Jackie, who also contributed the cover art, whose work is displayed internationally. She gets commissions from people around the world. We have an engineer on the project. We have a woman who is a C-level executive for a $30 million a year biotech company. And so that was important to me because I think that one of the things that happens in spiritual entrepreneurship is those of us who have credentials put those on the back burner. It's like, if I'm going to practice in spiritual entrepreneur land, I can't also acknowledge that I have all of these credentials over here. That has to stay separate. And because you and I have been in each other's worlds for a while now, I'm mostly focused on integration, on being the bridge between intuition and reason, science and spirit, our heads and our hearts, and really beginning to bring in a sense of wholeness. So you don't have to check your professional credentials at the door to do this kind of work, this intuitive intelligence work, this channeled writing. We want you to bring forward your gifts, talents, abilities, and expertise from traditional fields into and integrate with your intuition, because that is where I believe that we are most powerful as leaders. And that is where we actually create novel, unique, and useful ideas, processes, technologies. It doesn't come when we isolate our intuition from our credentials. And it certainly doesn't come when we check our credentials at the door and act as though we're the airy-fairy healy-feely types that came by this naturally, I'll say. I don't want to get too critical about that, but I think you get my point here. So when I look at who I invited into the book, who naturally gravitates to me are those who are educated and intuitive, who are accomplished, and also spiritually adept. In other words, everybody on the book has the capacity to read, to track, to move, to clear energy, and has done their own work around their spiritual gifts, in addition to being classically trained as psychologists, engineers, accountants, and so on.
Well, yeah, that is so powerful what you're saying about the integration of those two worlds that historically have been viewed as so dichotomous in nature. So I know just even through my own participation, being able to meld that together in a way that I'm able to harness that expertise, but also honor my own spiritual intelligence, my own connection with my intuition. There's not many spaces where credentialed folks can have the space to do that. It's usually one or the other. So just so powerful, the program that you're developing here and allowing people to step forward who are way showers and light leaders.
Yeah, way showers, light leaders, just people who have new ideas and aren't always sure about how to integrate those simply because they've been trained for so long to put their intuition. The intuition can operate behind the scenes, but God forbid we bring it front and center into any conversation in the corporate world or into the clinical world or anything like that. So I think that's the differentiator for Engelheim, is that we really look at the intuitive and intelligent.
Yeah.
Right. I think I've been in spiritual entrepreneurship land for a really long time at this point. And that's the thing I think is a missing link. It's not that there aren't really good leaders in the field. I just think that it's important for me to be at the helm of Engelheim as somebody I have a PhD in psychology. I have won awards for my work as a psychologist and as a therapist. And I'm also spiritually intelligent. So when we look at that combination, I just want to call in people who, I don't want to say are like me, because that's not what I mean, but it's just who identify enough with similarities to me that they know they'll be safe here in order to be able to hone their voices and to bring forward the things that are very important to them. To your point in your interview, you talked about leaving a legacy.
Yeah, how beautiful.
Thank you.
A similar thread of something you just shared about was, I'm wondering how going through this program and kind of mentoring us through the process, how did that stretch you professionally? Or maybe what surprised you in that process that maybe you didn't anticipate back in January of this year?
So that's such a great question, because I think that people are under the assumption that I do a whole lot of planning around what's going to come out of my mouth before it comes out of my mouth. You're laughing, so I don't know what that means.
It means I think the same for me as well. And I know what's true.
Yeah. So when I created what we fondly call the book club, but it was the course on channeling I forget how I said it, writing your own channeled book or something like that. What I really wanted to do is take people through the process that I go through myself when I'm channeling my pieces. And so in order to do that, I actually had to be in channel a lot and to trust that what my process is. I'll tune in and I'll say, okay, what are we focusing on today? Knowing that the first thing that came through was everybody was going to have 2 chapters. One was going to be their origin story, and the other was going to be focused on their medicine or their perspective on transformation, for example, or how they're using their gifts in the world in practical ways. So I knew that for sure. And then after that, a lot of the process is holding the space or holding the container for you guys to go in and tune into that part of you who is that, whether we call it your original mind or your creativity, that unlimited reservoir of innovation that when you're in flow, you can simply write through the process. and then to give you guys assignments that made sense based on the chapters. So I think at one point we had you guys do a timeline of all of your intuitive experiences, of all of your professional credentials, to be able to see like where are the cups I can write into, where are the ideas that I want to expand on. So that was one phase. And then the other thing I really feel like I'm going to say had to teach you, but was compelled to really remind you of, is that the writing process is different from the editing process. And so we really do have to put the internal editor on leave while we bring through the work. And then one of my favorite parts of the process was I function as the content editor. My responsibility is to look at what you have written and find any kinds of, I do this like linguistically, of course, as a linguistically able person, the sentence structures and things like that are one element of it. But also, I wanted this to be as jargon-free as possible. So if I'm using a word like transformation, is that the best word to use? Or can I go back to you and say, Alaina, can you dive down deeper into what you actually mean by this particular word? One of the things that I know, especially in spiritual entrepreneur land, is that we use a lot of these words that are generally accepted in I'll call it the culture of spiritual entrepreneurship or spirituality, like words like quantum, words like 5D, words that people just use for some reason and they don't know why they use them and they're not even actually accurate. And so for me, I wanted the book and I want Engelheim to be that place where it can be the cleanest and clearest language that is accessible with as little jargon as possible. It's not always possible to fully eliminate it because simply in spiritual spaces, we speak a kind of a different language. So I'll stop there for a second because I know that's a lot. I have a lot to say about this as it turns
I
out.
love it. Yeah, excellent. It's excellent. It sounds like you really have, it's not just about walking somebody through the process, but it's a lot of mentoring and coaching around how to hone that relationship with your channel or with your flow or with your creativity. What did you notice amongst the group, probably where the most resistance was for them?
Oh
What do you think?
boy.
The collective.
Oh boy. Everybody, it's so interesting. And I do this too. When we start a project, I think that Virginia Woolf said this. She said at the beginning of a writing project, there's this natural enthusiasm that wells forward. She said that's never the problem. But she said over time, it moves into a slow boil. So you have to just keep writing. So it is in the persistence of the writing. It's showing up week after week. That's one of the reasons why I had so many writing sessions. We would get together on the round table, and even if it was simply to hold space and say, okay, this is what we're working on today, and then go do and come back and check in, that was an important part of the process. Left to our own devices, nothing's ever going to get written.
Truly.
Unless we have a deadline, unless we have some kind of, I'm going to say, skin in the game around what we're actually going to be producing, nothing gets written. And I said that to my friend Elise yesterday. I said, if it weren't for this book club, there's nothing, I would have never gotten anything done this year. So I don't remember what your original question is. Oh, the resistance part. I think actually after we got to writing and everybody got their first drafts good to go, and then I went through and did the content editing, which I want to ask you about in a second from your perspective. The next part was, which you brought up in your interview, and I think Valerie also talked about in hers, which was the visibility piece. Like, well, oh shit, like people are going to read this. And, oh, I have to like announce to my community that I've written this book. It's that kind of stuff that we bump up against. I think professionally, when we look at the content of this, I even wrestled with if I was going to call it channeled messages from beyond the sun or just messages from beyond the sun. Ultimately, we landed on messages from beyond the sun because I really did want to make this accessible to as many people as possible. And not everybody understands the language of channeling. And so I really wanted this to be an invitation for people to step into a different kind of world. And just to allow more people into the world. So there was a little bit of resistance or question mark around that. And then the other piece was launch date, like when is the best time to launch this? And I really had to feel into this. We had thought we were going to launch it in November, and then I forget what happened, but there were a couple of things that just went sideways. And I'm a contributing author on this too. I had to write my own stuff. And you read it. I had to have you read it because I'm the content editor on everybody, but I can't content edit my own stuff. So you had the vantage point of being able to see me in my process as well, which I would love to hear from you about those couple of things that I mentioned. What was it like for you to be the reviewer on mine?
Yeah, no, it was honestly a privilege. It was really fun to get in the driver's seat a little bit as far as the editing part, because to speak to what you already elaborated on, like the actual writing process was unique in and of itself as far as being different than anything I produced before. But then being able to see you go through a similar process as you're telling your origin story, how you're talking about your multidimensional gifts, like it was really amazing to help guide that. And I feel like as I was providing feedback, giving feedback to your editor isn't always the most comfortable thing. But also just to see that this almost like a universal experience that we all shared collectively what comes to mind is like a maze, and you're weaving your way through this maze, and sometimes you'll go down a route and it'll dead end and it won't be the right direction for you, and so you'll have to pivot and maybe double back and look at it a different way. And so it is like this natural flow that you're weaving through to ultimately get to your finalized product. And I think for you, in reading your chapters, I asked a lot of questions of like, help me understand this better. Like, how do I go deeper? Because at the end of the day, we are our own expert about our lives and our gifts. But I think one of the really unique invitations about this book is being able to write it in a way that allows others to understand your point of view and bring them into your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I will say about my own process too, that especially the multidimensional technology, the medicine piece, I really wrestled with how to bring that forward in a way that made sense, that invited people to consider that they do have, especially the ones who are experts, do have their own unique way of doing things, and they don't have to over rely on other people's modalities or certifications, because that's one of the things that we get into, I think, as experts. We're lifelong learners. And there can be this point of, well, I'm credentialed in so many things, and yet my voice, my unique perspective gets lost in the noise of everyone else's credentials and certifications. And we use other people's, especially famous people, like I think about like people who might be certified in a Joe Dispenza kind of modality or something like that, that they almost over rely on the originators of these modalities, and there's languish in the background. And that's the last thing I want to have happen with this new wave of healers and light leaders who are coming forward. I want us to be able to stand in our own power, our own truth about the uniqueness of our abilities as well. So that was a tough chapter for me to write, and it did take a while. In fact, I finished it a week ago Sunday, like skin of my teeth kind of situation, and I promptly got sick. Like the next day I woke up and I had a cold and whatever. So I know that for me, that's part of my process in when I bring forward something that's important in the world. Sometimes I have a little bit of a rebound, like my body goes, oh my goodness, like what just happened? So that was my behind the scenes process on that chapter in particular. And then I really appreciated your questions on my origin story, because I know it so well.
Right.
And I've told it so many times, and to get your perspective and to be able to answer some of your questions was super helpful. So, and then I'll throw that back to you. What was it like for you to have me edit yours for content?
I think that, again, it pushed against my academic, like getting feedback from the professor paradigm. But I think the way that you did it was very intentional in the sense that it was, again, instead of coming from a place of criticism or judgment, it was coming from a place of curiosity, like I mentioned earlier. And so it was always framed in a way that like help me understand this better, or how can we go deeper with the use of a word or phrase. Or one section that I remember, probably the biggest part that you gave me feedback on was around, I really struggled with how much to share in my origin story, because I think this is like, again, the delicate line that we as credentialed professionals and spiritual entrepreneurs, we toe of like, I want to open my heart and share, but there's also what's the line around that? I'm not a live stream influencer. I'm entitled to my own personal experiences that are kept close to my heart and my immediate circle. And so navigating that and finding like what is a good amount of information to share that is truthful versus I'm sharing this because this is my own internalized processing and my own catharsis and my own platform to share this experience. So really, I think you did a great job of kind of fine tuning that in a way that felt true to me, but also in some ways protected me. And as far as making sure that I wasn't oversharing or that it was truly what I wanted my audience to receive versus what I just needed to eat through, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah. The difference between being an author, like being published as an author and putting your work out there for other people to read versus journaling.
Right.
Like there's a purpose for journaling, and then there's a purpose for communicating your experience to your readers for their own transformation. Now, there are people, probably, I think about, bless her heart, she ended her life a couple of years ago. Heather Armstrong was one of my favorite bloggers back in the day. And she, I think, did a pretty good job of writing about the deeper parts of her life that were painful and difficult, and really was an open book, pardon the pun, if you will, around her life. And that's one approach. But I do think that um, for those of us who still who are standing in our credentials, there's a different way of articulating our personal experiences that, to your point, holds those pieces that are close to us and also allows people a deeper look into who we are as humans so that they can understand us better and therefore perhaps understand themselves better as well.
Well, yeah, a very important extension of that bridge that you mentioned earlier is navigating that.
Yeah.
So my question for you is what's next for Engelheim Press? What are you looking forward to here as we enter into a new year?
Oh my goodness. Well, next year is all about solo projects at Engelheim. I work with people privately, and I'm also going to be hosting an ongoing, I love to call it book club, for the people who want to be part of the another anthology, like a volume 2 of Beyond the Sun, I suppose we will call it. Because I believe that there's a process. I think the first step really is to be a contributing author to an anthology. It's easier than saying, I'm writing my whole book. It's not that you can't do it first thing, but it is an easier ask than writing a whole book on your own. And then for those who are ready for their solo projects, there's going to be a one-on-one mentoring program that they will go through one-on-one with me to really develop their ideas it's really for people who are ready to change the conversation in their field around whether it's healing or aging or parenting or whatever it is, to change the conversation and to have a foundational aspect of the business that you can hold in your hands. I've always said that books have always been a big part of my marketing strategy around my community outreach and engagement projects and so on. And I think the same holds true for the people who are coming into this private work with me in not just becoming the author, but really becoming the conversation changer in your field. And so that's the process. That process will take end to end, it'll take about a year to get it done. So by this time next year, my hope is that Engelheim has 5 or 6 or even 10 different books that are coming out and remember, it's who you become in the process. So it's not just jot something down on the page and send it out, because there's a lot of shit on the internet right now. So I really want this to be refined and quite exceptional work in the field of spiritual entrepreneurship, transformation, psychology, personal development, and that kind of space. So that's the vision. And Engelheim is very eager to welcome in more of the angelic writers that are coming our way.
Yeah, come on in. The water's warm. It's an exciting time. Can you share with the listeners what offers you have going on right now for folks who are purchasing our book as far as things that they can gain access to?
Oh, yeah. So I have 2 bonuses that I'm just saying thanks so much for being part of this journey with us. One is if you buy it now and send me your invoice, that I have to remember what I said for this one. This is I'm packaging all of these author interviews into one limited series podcast. So you'll be able to listen end to end with all the authors, reading their pieces and getting interviewed and just getting to know them more deeply. So that's one. And then if you also leave a review on Amazon, I'm inviting you into my end of the year review retreat. It's a over $200 value. And if you leave the review and send me a screenshot of the review and the invoice, you're invited into that as my guest. And so I'm very excited about that. That's fast action though. That has to be done by Saturday. So that's what I have going on.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, this was so amazing. Dr. Robyn McKay, publisher, overseeing us, a shepherd for the angelic authors to come in. Thank you so much for your work and for sharing more about this project and your experience. I'm grateful for you.
I'm grateful for you too. Thanks for joining me.